A cocktail of prescription medication, the crash, then the impact. A car accident can happen to anyone. It can be caused by road conditions, driver error, or chance circumstances. A drug-related crash is different. A prescription drug-related crash occurs when someone chooses to take medication and then drive. A driver ignores or does not realize impairment. Many times they have disregarded prescription use warnings and have not consulted their physician about driving. Prescription medications, even when taken as prescribed, can affect a driver's judgment and psychomotor skills. Consult your physician and pharmacist. No one is safe, and the impact can be fatal.
Because it come in as an unknown, when we first got there, you just see the car crash. So it just looked like an innocent car that had left the roadway and crashed. And at first, I remember pulling up thinking, wow, that's pretty amazing that you could fit your car in there like that. And then, to get out and to start talking to some of the people that were there ahead of me, and you start to realize right off the bat that this is way more than a car that had crashed into a brick structure. I mean, there are body parts laying around the car, and that is not something that you see ever. Without getting overly graphic, I mean, to see 3 women that were literally run over, 2 of them run over, and one of them thrown several feet up into the air and against the wall of the church. It's hard to describe the second 2 ladies. I mean, unfortunately, the trauma that their bodies sustained from being drugged underneath that car, up a couple of steps, across an entryway, and then down a couple of steps, their bodies were almost unrecognizable. Probably the most gruesome and horrific scene I'd been a part of in my 20-plus year career. Certainly traumatic for not only the 3 victims, but the first responders, the volunteers, and probably most importantly, the witnesses that saw the whole thing unfold.
I remember the dispatch center putting out a call for a personal injury auto accident on Mountain View Street in the village of Voorheesville, which is a street that I'm very familiar with. The vehicle was resting against the bell tower of the church where the crash had occurred. There were several victims that I was able to see in very, very grave condition when I arrived. And clearly many of the police and fire and EMS people that did respond were really taken aback by what they saw when they arrived. Ultimately, we did impound the Burgess vehicle, bring it back to our station, and compile an investigative file for the district attorney's office.
When the call came in, and I had heard those 3 women who are walkers, a part of a walking group, I anticipated seeing the crash scene very close to the shoulder of the roadway. When I got to the scene and saw how far off the roadway it was certainly shocking. I did not expect that to be the location. And at that time, I was under the impression that there had to be something more happening that would have caused a car to go that far off of the roadway and cause the collision that it did. So it was certainly like nothing I've ever seen before. It was my belief, again, given the nature of the crash, that something had to have been involved for that to have happened, whether it was a medical situation, drugs, alcohol, I wasn't sure. What I had asked the Albany County Sheriff's Department to do was to send a drug recognition expert to the hospital to interview Mrs. Burgess, as well as I also asked for them to ask the driver to consent to a blood test. I think everyone agreed that something was off about Mrs. Burgess. The question was it shock that caused her reaction? Was it impairment by drugs that caused the reaction? Or was it just that's her personality? And that became the million-dollar question. What was the cause? What led her to act the way she did? and that became very tricky.
We had the operator of the vehicle, who was, at the time of my arrival, still in the vehicle, that being Luann Burgess. She was clearly going to require medical transport to a local hospital. I was able to get an investigator assigned to stay with her the entire time and then go with her down to the hospital. The investigator who accompanied Mrs. Burgess to the hospital did relay some information back at some point in time, which indicated that she may have been taking some form of prescription medication. At that point in time, we didn't or weren't able to ascertain exactly the levels or quantities or what, in fact, she was prescribed to be taking. We did make contact with a drug recognition expert who we sent down to the emergency room to meet with our investigators for the purposes of trying to do an examination, if that was possible, with her, to try to see if we could make some determinations as to her condition with respect to the medication she was taking and whether or not there were any outward indications that it impaired her ability to operate the vehicle that she was in. The circumstances of the crash were really unexplainable in looking at it from the outside. We had a fairly straight piece of road, a low-speed road, and we had ended up with what appeared to be not a low-speed crash, not a super high-speed crash, but a crash that was well off the paved surface of the road. We were trying to put together how did this vehicle come to be this far out of position from the roadway at this speed. And in interviewing Mrs. Burgess, she clearly didn't know at the scene that she had hit anyone. But it was clear, and it became more clear when she got to the hospital, that she had no concept of what had happened or the people that she had struck during this crash. I believe that in her interviews at the hospital, she stated that one of her flip-flops may have come off and may have been somehow entangled in the accelerator of the vehicle. But it just seemed like a long way for somebody to be that far off the highway without realizing that they were clearly not or no longer driving on the road. It just seemed that there should be some further explanation or something else that we could find in an investigation which might explain this certainly better than a flip-flop stuck on the gas pedal.
Mrs. Burgess also had other medications on board for Parkinson's disease. So the question has to do with Parkinson's disease medications in driving. About 10 years back, in the medical literature, there was a number of reports of individuals suffering from sleep attacks. And sleep attacks were defined as an immediate onset of sleep with little warning. The FDA issued a warning regarding these medications and cautioned individuals against driving while taking these medications. This could be further compounded if someone is taking other central nervous system depressants such as benzodiazepines, which would be Xanax, Valium, lorazepam. These medications are used as anti-anxiety medications, and these medications would increase reaction time and have been long associated with increased risk for motor vehicle crashes.
The inherent problem is that there's a reason why these people are put on the prescriptions that they are, that they have some sort of physical, medical condition that is requiring help through prescriptions. And so in any time you have a crash, one of the things that police are trained to look for is there any signs of impairment? That becomes masked in prescription drug cases where you're not sure, especially when you don't know the driver, you have no background knowledge of him or her. When you first arrive, you don't know if it's a head injury, if it's shock, if it's their mannerism, just how they are in general, or if it's impairment by the drugs. There is a huge difference between impaired drivers on prescription drugs that are properly taking the prescriptions versus those who are abusing the prescriptions versus those who are taking illicit substances versus those who are drinking alcohol. Everyone now knows you can't drink and drive. I mean, it's been beat over everyone's head for decades now, and it's finally getting to the public that we know it's a bad thing to drink and drive. Once you put a prescription drug case in, and we saw in the media in this case, I think everyone was split, and it was almost a 50-50 split, it seemed. Those that thought the driver should be punished harshly, those that said she shouldn't have been punished at all because she was taking medication as prescribed. Impaired driving by prescription is just as bad as if you had too much to drink or it was crack cocaine. There is no distinction. Just like there's no distinction between beer, wine, and hard liquor, there's no distinction between illicit drugs and prescription drugs. If it impairs you, it impairs you, and you have to be responsible for that impairment. And that hasn't gotten out to the public yet.
I have a foster child that I was taken to camp. So I was on my way driving over to drop him off at camp so he could get on the bus to go. On the way coming back, it's like a back road, Mountain View Terrace, and I go that way. And I was down probably about, maybe 5 minutes down the road, the most it was, and my flip-flop, I had it up under by the pedal, and it got stuck. So I leaned over and was trying to pull the flip-flop up. And then by the time I came back up and trying to do that, there was a brick wall right in front of me. Within seconds, I hit the brick wall. I didn't have a chance to even put my brake on. It happened so fast. But I don't remember. I remember somebody coming to me, telling me not to move. And from there, I remember going into the hospital. I don't know how I got there. I don't remember going in the ambulance. And from there, I don't know where actually I was. And I don't remember going to the room. I don't know how long I was in the hospital. And the day I went home, the one I do remember seeing my husband and my younger brother. It was like, what happened? What did I do? Yeah, my husband says, we'll talk about it when we get home. I said, no, what'd I do? You know, then I got upset with him. And he goes, you had a bad accident. I said, where? And he told me where. And I said, how did I get my car into that entrance? It was like going into a small garage door that was over like 2-3 lanes over from like where I was driving. And he told me I hit 3 people. And I asked him, did I kill him? I'm gonna be okay. All right. And he told me that, and I says, I don't know. I don't remember seeing anybody or hearing, besides the woman, to get my husband for me. The paramedics said that they were talking to me when I was in I don't know if it was the operating room, emergency room, or whatever, when they were doing my leg. I don't remember talking to anybody. And I'm like, I need to know, where were the people that I hit? I mean, I don't know them. I know now that, I did hurt some people. And it's hard for me to say I killed them. It just brings back, the memory of that. And I feel so bad for the people.
Taking a combination of drugs like Luann Burgess did can impair the simple tasks that are used when driving. For example, ability to react to factors that come into play, whether it be people walking across the street or a red light or a stop sign. It can affect your reaction time. It can affect your perception, actually, your vision and your perception of time and distance. And all those things that you would use, a normal person would use in typical driving that seem to be pretty regular and almost come along as a second nature. When you're under the influence of different drugs, it can have a profound effect on those. And I believe that was what took place in this particular case with her not braking as she struck the multiple people, going up off of the curb, traveling for quite some distance and actually striking a building. She claims at the time there was a problem with her flip-flop, and even if that was the case, under normal circumstances, a person who wasn't under the influence of those drugs would be more likely to remedy that situation without it leading to what took place. But if she did lean down or attempt to, work something out with the pedals, her reactions and her ability to do that would even be slowed significantly to the point that she wouldn't be able to complete a task like that as a person who wasn't in the influence would be able to do. When I first saw her, she was laying in the hospital bed. She appeared to be dazed, a little bit confused, somewhat disconnected from what was going on around her. There was difficulty with her answering my questions. Some of the questions had to be repeated. And it was not as though there was any distractions in the room, because for most of the time I was in there, there wasn't hospital staff right there with her. So I could safely say that, there was a level of confusion and, a little bit of disorientation in her manner, in the way she was speaking to me and the way she was answering the questions.
This case was bigger than our driver. This case represents anybody who's out there on the roadway. And one of the purposes of sentencing is a deterrent not only to the defendant, but to society in general. And what we thought, and I still hold as true, is that one of the best deterrents would have been a jail sentence with the probation for Mrs. Burgess. That we asked for the maximum because of what happened, but also to show to the public that this is a crime that has serious consequences, and to think twice before getting behind the wheel after they've taken their prescription drugs. I think it was a very difficult decision for the judge to make, and he based it on reviewing everything and sentenced the defendant the way he thought was appropriate under all the circumstances. And these cases will be more difficult too, because again, your defendants have legitimate reasons for the medication, and that also weighs in, I think, on the judge's sentencing decisions as well.
I reviewed volumes of papers, all of the grand jury testimony, all of the police investigation reports, and it was clear that there was no alcohol involved at all, and it appeared that she was taking her prescribed medications in accordance with the levels of medication that had been ordered. But something happened that morning that caused her to black out for a period of seconds. But she claimed to have never had an incident prior to this incident that would have given her reason to believe that there was anything about the medications that could have caused a problem. She had taken these medications in accordance with the prescription over a period of months, if not years, and never had an issue that had been noted in the file, at least with driving. And so this was a case of first impression, but it resolved in a manner where the defendant entered pleas of guilty to 3 counts of criminally negligent homicide and received a sentence within the parameters of the plea bargain proposal by the people that did not require any jail time, but a period of probation and 600 hours of community service.
As far as where we go from here, what I hope for is that I think motor vehicle needs to get more involved, the pharmacies need to get more involved, the physician community needs to get more involved, and there has to be an awareness. There has to be awareness of, and I too am on medication, so I have a responsibility when I take my medication that I know exactly what's going to happen to me and how it actually responds in my body. Everyone manages medications differently. But at the same token, if you've got a label that says, be careful, this is going to cause drowsiness, you have a responsibility. And as soon as you take that and put yourself behind a wheel, you've assumed responsibility of that warning. And that's what I firmly believe in the driver of this crash did not take heed to.